In the ancient world, power was built on land, lineage, and the quiet control of lives kept out of sight. Rome, the center of that world, projected order and greatness through marble temples and triumphant speeches, but beneath its polished surface lay a network of hidden arrangements that shaped families, alliances, and political futures. Among the noble class, daughters were not simply children, they were strategic assets, prepared from birth to secure influence through marriage. Some families took this system even further, creating private spaces where young girls were raised in secrecy, trained for futures they did not choose. These rooms existed behind reinforced doors, buried beneath villas, unnoticed by guests and unknown to most of the household. This story follows one such villa at the edge of Rome, where the walls held quiet lives, unspoken fears, and the weight of a society built on control. Twilight slid across the Roman countryside in a slow, heavy curtain, settling over the stone villas that dotted the slopes beyond the Via Appia. The estates looked peaceful from a distance, columns catching the last orange light, vineyards rustling as if nothing unusual ever happened behind those high walls. But beneath one particular villa owned by Senator Gaius Cornelius Lentulus Sura, the quiet wasn't peaceful at all. It was too careful, too measured, the kind of quiet that forms when people are afraid to make mistakes. Beneath the mosaic floors and painted corridors, past a narrow stairwell that most visitors never noticed, stood a short wooden door that murmured whenever the wind brushed the villa's outer courtyard. The slaves called it Ianua Susurrans, the whispering door. Nobody remembered who first used the name, only that it stuck. Doors above ground didn't whisper like that. Only this one did, and only because someone had built an entire hidden world behind it. Above, Lentulus Sura played the generous host. He had spent years perfecting the performance. Warm laugh, open gestures, exaggerated tales of serving under Lucullus in the East. Guests admired his taste in wine and pretended not to notice when his stories drifted a little too far from truth. Roman politics rewarded confidence more than accuracy. Everyone in the room understood that. What none of them were meant to understand was that directly underneath their feet, 3 girls no older than 14 lay on thin straw beds, listening to those same laughs vibrate through the stones overhead. They had been brought from towns outside Praeneste, quiet farming places, where families didn't have the money or power to push back if a nobleman claimed he was acting in their daughter's best interest. Their names were not written in any household records. Their existence wasn't meant to reach beyond these walls. The idea wasn't new. Wealthy Roman families had been locking away their daughters, sometimes nieces, sometimes girls purchased outright for generations. The practice never appeared in decrees or in the Senate's dusty archives. It lived in the margins of letters, in the muttering of house slaves, and the clipped warnings whispered at public baths. Keep your daughters close when nobles pass through town. In 74 BCE, Varro had complained vaguely that certain households nurtured their maidens in darkness. Align scholars later softened, insisting he meant it metaphorically. But the stubborn persistence of the rumor said otherwise. Lentulus Sura believed in the old reasoning that a girl kept hidden was safe from scandal, and a girl kept untouched was a bargaining chip worth more than silver. Marriage in elite circles had stopped being personal long ago. It was arithmetic. A virgin daughter allowed a senator to tie himself to another family with contracts, dowries, and future favors. Letting a girl walk freely in the world introduced risk, gossip, unsuitable suitors, the possibility that a man of lower rank might charm her first. These men did not like risk. They preferred walls, locks, and obedience. Lucius Sergius Catilina arrived late to that evening's gathering. His presence stirred the air the way a torch disturbs shadows. He carried his reputation everywhere he went, ambition like a sword, rumors thick as smoke, charm sharpened to a dangerous edge. When he stepped across the atrium tiles, the faintest thump rose from below. A dropped plate, maybe a startled movement from one of the girls. Most men in the room didn't notice it. Catilina did. His eyes flicked downward for a brief moment, a small curl in the corner of his mouth offering the closest thing to acknowledgement. He had heard whispers of nobles storing their daughters like grain. He had also heard worse, Rome ran on secrets as much as laws, and he had learned young that exposing another man's private machinery only invited someone to expose yours. Below, the girl who had caused the sound, Marcia pressed her hand over her mouth. She had been living in the lower rooms long enough to recognize the weight of footsteps overhead. Heavy ones meant the steward. Light, quick ones meant the older slave woman who brought them barley bread and watered wine. The footsteps now were neither. They were numerous, scattered, the rhythm of a dinner party reaching its final course. The underground chambers weren't built for comfort, though Lentilosura insisted they were safer than the streets. Each girl had a cramped recess carved out of limestone, furnished with nothing more than a straw mattress and a clay lamp. A single corridor connected the sleeping alcoves to a small room where they ate. Once a week, twice, if the steward happened to be in a generous mood, they were led into the inner courtyard for sunlight. They weren't allowed near the gates. They weren't allowed to speak to visiting men. They were to grow quietly until the senator decided how their futures would be used. Some Roman families justified the practice through superstition. A household that sheltered a virgin beneath its floors was supposedly blessed with steadier harvests, fewer illnesses, stronger fortunes. Pliny later mocked this belief, writing that purity gains nothing from darkness except dust. But by then the practice had already taken deep root in certain circles. When the dinner upstairs finally ended, voices thinned and lamps dimmed. Catilina paused at the threshold, giving Lentilosura a look that held recognition but not judgment. The senator returned it with a tight smile. Both men understood that underneath the villa, beyond the whispering door, the girls settled back into stillness, waiting, always waiting, for lives shaped entirely by decisions made in rooms they would never see. The people of Praeneste were used to losing things. Goats wandered off into the hills. Tools disappeared from workshops. Traders occasionally vanished on the long road to Tibur, after taking a wrong turn toward bandit country. But when girls began disappearing, the town reacted with a different, quiet one, filled with suspicion and helplessness rather than ordinary misfortune. Everyone had a story, and none of them had endings. Marcia had been one of them. Before she found herself listening to muffled footsteps beneath a senator's villa, she had lived in a clay-roofed house on a small street lined with fig trees. Her father worked with leather, her mother with spinning wool. Their life was unremarkable, which in the ancient world was a kind of safety. Unremarkable families usually avoided the attention of men like Lentilosura. Usually. It started with a festival afternoon. The town had gathered for the Floralia Games, and Marcia wandered too close to the edge of the crowd, distracted by the colored ribbons tossed to children. When she didn't return home that evening, her parents searched the alleys and the market stalls with lanterns, calling her name until their voices cracked. Neighbors joined them, but the town had already gone still for the night. The gates were shut. No sign of her. In the morning, a rider arrived from Rome, with official papers stamped by a noble household. The message was polished, impersonal, and cold. Marcia had been taken into service by Senator Lentilosura. Her family's presence was not required. A small pouch of coins, far too small to mean anything, yet too large for a simple apology, was left at their door. No accusation, no explanation, no chance to object. Praeneste had seen this pattern before. 6 years earlier, a potter's daughter vanished at dawn while helping her mother fetch water. Not long after, a messenger appeared with a similar pouch of coins and a whisper that the girl had been reassigned. The townspeople had muttered, but they didn't challenge it. Rome's laws favored Rome's men. Rural families lacked the influence to drag their complaints into the Senate and survive the consequences. Rumors spread instead. Some said the nobles kept the girls as wards, grooming them for wealthy marriages in the city. Others believed darker stories that the upper classes stored pure girls for religious reasons, convinced their untouched presence brought good fortune. Older men in the taverns claimed the practice was ancient, older than Rome itself, rooted in old Italian folklore, where families hid daughters underground to protect them from wandering spirits during Saturnalia. Most knew these were stories meant to ease guilt. The truth was simpler. Powerful men took what they wanted, and villages like Praeneste existed in the shadow of that power. Marcia had been frightened when the steward dragged her through the villa's courtyard for the first time. She remembered the tiled floors, the smell of olive pressings, and the torch brackets lining the walls. She remembered crying until her throat burned, because she knew she wasn't being prepared for a job. She wasn't being placed with other servants. She was being separated, sealed away. The other two girls beneath the villa came from similar circumstances. Livia, barely 12, had been found in a merchant caravan that had stopped outside Aricia. The noble who took her claimed she was traded to him by her mother, though no one could locate the supposed woman afterward. The third girl, Clodia, came from a family indebted to a tax collector who owed favors to Lentulus Sura. Her disappearance had been disguised as a relocation. Rome had many ways to rename things it didn't want to admit openly. Across the countryside, families whispered names of girls who never returned. Aquilina from Gabii, Tullia from Antium, a pair of twins from Ficulia. Each story followed the same rhythm: a brief search, a guarded announcement, and then a slow, resigned silence. A few families tried to fight back. One father marched to Rome in 68 BCE, demanding an audience with the Senate after his daughter was taken by the household of a former praetor. He never made it past the forum. Witnesses later said the guards escorted him out. No one saw him again. The nobles framed their actions as guardianship. They insisted the girls were safer under their roofs than in the chaotic world beyond. Marauding soldiers, street gangs, predatory merchants, there were endless dangers to point at. Yet the danger they created remained unspoken. In Praeneste, the marketplace still carried echoes of Marcia's name. Her mother avoided the well where they used to wash wool together. Her father couldn't bring himself to pass the fig trees lining their street. People tried offering comfort, but comfort in small towns had limits. Fear filled the gaps, spreading quietly through conversations half finished. There were glimpses of rebellion. Farmers refused to sell produce to messengers wearing senatorial insignia. A tavern owner once spat on the floor when a noble steward walked in, though he apologized immediately out of terror. People wanted to resist, but Rome was too close, and too strong, and too willing to crush the problems of its lower classes. By the time Marcia reached the underground chamber beneath Lentulus Sura's villa, Praeneste had already learned to mourn her without hope. Families there adjusted the same way Rome always demanded its subjects adjust quickly, painfully, and with no expectation of justice. The villa's whispering door closed behind her, and the countryside above carried on as though losing girls to noble ambition was simply another part of rural life, like droughts or early frosts. In Rome, power rarely moved through open declarations. It moved through ledgers quiet, brittle sheets of wax and parchment tucked into the corners of a nobleman's study. Senator Lentulus Sura kept his in an ivory chest that looked ornamental at first glance, the kind of box meant to hold jewelry or imported perfumes. Anyone opening it, though, would find rows of names, dowries, land guarantees, and scribbled agreements that tied one ambitious man to another. Among these entries were the futures of the hidden girls beneath his villa. They weren't named directly. Nobles understood the dangers of writing certain truths too plainly. Instead, the ledger referred to them in coded lines. Future arrangement with Calpurnius family pending confirmation. Marriage contract reserved for Publius Silanus upon reaching curule office. Each note linked a girl to a favor, a political debt, a promised alliance. Their bodies weren't the point. Their controlled purity was. In the arithmetic of Roman politics, virginity translated to leverage. Lentulus Sura reviewed the ledger often, running a thumb along the wax tablets as he traced the promises he'd extracted over the years. He had built his career with these silent negotiations agreements, forged not in Senate debates, but in dim back rooms scented with resin and old scrolls. He believed Roman politics was too unstable to rely on rhetoric alone. Alliances dissolved with a single insult. Votes swayed with silver. Favors evaporated in the heat of scandal. But a daughter sealed away beneath one's house, untouched and invisible, could anchor a bond in place. The newest entry involved a rising star from the Calpurnius family. Gaius Calpurnius Piso, sharp-eyed and eager, had visited the villa 2 weeks before. Pacing across the mosaic floor, he had spoken of his hopes for the quaestorship and of the powerful patrons he needed to secure it. Lentulus Sura listened patiently, offering watered wine while calculating the man's usefulness. Only once did the conversation shift toward the subject neither wanted to name directly. "I hear," Piso said lightly, tracing a finger along the rim of his cup, "that your household has future prospects, protected ones." Lentulus Sura didn't flinch. Some families maintain traditions to ensure stability. Piso nodded, the phrase enough to confirm what he'd already heard in whispers. The senator had girls, more than one, hidden, preserved, and someday available for marriage negotiations. Piso asked no further questions. In the world of Roman politics, naming something outright was considered rude. It stripped the transaction of its elegance. The agreement they formed that day was sealed with a handshake and an unfinished sentence. Piso would support Lentulus Sura in securing a key position within the censor's circle. In return, one of the girls would be promised to the Calpurnius line when she reached the age of marriage. No documents were signed. Deals like this lived better in memory than in ink. Below the villa, Marcia knew nothing of the ledger. She only sensed that their confinement tightened whenever visitors of high rank arrived. The female slave, an aging woman named Rufa, would usher them into a corner room, relight their lamps, and instruct them not to speak. Rufa carried out her tasks with a strange tenderness, though her voice shook whenever she heard footsteps on the stairs. Rufa had been in the household long enough to understand every part of the system. She had seen the previous generation of kept girls married off to men they hadn't met until the morning of the ceremony. She had also seen one disappear quietly after a rumor reached the wrong ears. No one mentioned that girl anymore. The villa's steward refused to answer questions. Lentulus Sura pretended she had never existed. Marcia sensed something unspoken in Rufa's eyes, pity mixed with resignation. The girl wondered whether the woman had once been taken from a town like Praeneste herself, or whether she had grown up entirely within the villa, molded early into service. Rufa never said. Silence protected everyone. Clodia, the oldest of the three girls, understood more than she let on. She caught fragments of conversation through floor cracks, learned to identify the tone of political bargaining, even without names. When men upstairs argued in sharp bursts of Latin phrases like consular influence or voting bloc, she memorized the cadence. She knew decisions about them were being made. She just didn't know which of them the next promise applied to. One evening, after a long meeting above, Clodia noticed Rufa carrying new tunics into their chamber. They were simple but higher quality than usual. Raised hems, softer wool, cleaner stitching. Rufa placed them silently on each girl's bed. "What are these for?" Clodia asked. Rufa's gaze flickered toward the ceiling. "You may be seen soon." None of the girls slept that night. Being seen could mean many things. It could mean a noblewoman evaluating them for marriage suitability checking posture, manners, skin, teeth. It could mean a potential suitor's family visiting discreetly. Or it could mean something worse, a testing of value, the kind nobles believed they had the right to conduct. Above them, Lentulus Sura and Piso finished marking the final lines of their unwritten agreement. Piso smoked incense from the small bronze dish on the table, letting the scent drift through the study as if cleansing the air of what they'd just decided. Neither man mentioned the girls again. The transaction was complete. The senator placed the ledger back into the ivory chest and closed the lid softly, sealing the futures of three young girls inside a box far too small to hold the weight of their lives. Meanwhile, beneath the villa, the whispering door released a long, tired sigh, as if the house itself understood what had just been traded away. In the lower part of the villa, there was a wooden door that every servant avoided. No rule was written about it, yet everyone understood what it meant. Roman households often had hidden spaces, but this one felt heavier than normal storage rooms. The slaves moved around it as if the door itself carried warning. Every day, the servants walked through the long stone corridor to reach the storerooms. They passed wine jars, baskets of dried wheat, and stacks of folded cloth. At the very end of the hallway stood the door. It was not grand or decorated. It was simple and worn, but its presence shaped the whole corridor. The servants called it the door that never opened, because none of them were ever allowed to touch it. The few who had asked about it in the past quickly learned it was safer not to wonder. The villa's steward, Hilaris, had served the household long enough to understand its secrets without needing them explained. His job covered everything from counting food supplies to managing the other slaves. But the quiet duty that sat deepest on his shoulders was the one tied to that door. He carried keys he hoped he would not need to use. He checked the corridor more often than he checked any other room. The weight of the door followed him throughout his day. The older servant, Rufa, understood the door in a different way. She had been in the villa longer than many others, long enough to sense when something important hid in a room. She took special care when walking near the door. Her steps slowed, her breathing softened, and she avoided looking directly at the wood. Over time, she had learned that secrets in rich homes were often buried in places like this, quiet corners where the walls were thicker and the air felt still. New slaves entering the villa always noticed the strange behavior around the door. They watched how the older servants carried themselves, how their voices lowered whenever they neared the end of the hallway, and how no one made noise in that space. Without being told, the new slaves understood they must follow the same pattern. The villa trained them simply through the silence surrounding the door. The door itself carried signs of age, thin cracks, faded marks, and uneven coloring, but the old wood also held signs of use. The scratches near the bottom suggested it had been handled before, even if no one spoke of it. The air around it felt colder and heavier, as if something inside the room pressed outward, but could not escape. Above this corridor, the villa appeared normal. Visiting senators admired the mosaics and stone carvings that decorated the main rooms. They praised the structure, the brightness of the courtyard, and the beauty of the garden. They saw nothing unusual. They did not notice the thicker walls or the reinforced beams built generations earlier. These hidden details were part of the villa's design, meant to protect something stored beneath the floors. The servants carried food trays and jugs of water through the hall every day. They moved with quiet discipline. They had grown used to balancing the demands of the house with the presence of the door. They did not talk about the girls hidden below, though they all felt the truth. It lingered like dust that never fully settled. During the nights, the corridor changed. When lamps were low and the rest of the villa slept, the wood of the door shifted softly. The sound was small, almost like a sigh. The walls around it creaked as the temperature dropped. To most people, these noises would mean little, but to the servants, who lived close to fear and caution, each sound mattered. They tried to sleep with these small echoes still in their ears. Cornelia, the senator's wife, rarely walked near the lower corridor, but she sensed the tension that spread from that part of the house. She noticed the careful movements of the servants, the way Hilaris grew more serious near dusk, and the way Rufa always seemed exhausted after carrying supplies to the lower rooms. Cornelia understood that a hidden part of the household shaped everyone's actions, even if she did not see it directly. The slaves followed a strict pattern. They kept their heads down near the door. They finished their work quickly. They never lingered. This behavior became part of the daily rhythm. The entire villa moved around the door the same way water moves around a rock in a river, always adjusting, always shifting. As days passed, nothing changed on the outside, yet tension built inside the villa like stored heat. Even simple tasks like sweeping the floor or carrying jugs felt heavier in that section of the house. The servants felt the difference even if they did not speak about it. The door did not open, but the atmosphere around it grew tighter. The door stood as a reminder of the hidden lives beneath the villa. Lives shaped not by choice, but by the plans of those in power above them. It held the weight of noble ambition, unspoken rules, and the quiet suffering of those who had to obey. Each day, the servants walked past it carrying bread, oil, or folded cloth. Each night, the wood shifted again. No one touched the latch. No one asked questions. The villa continued its routines, built upon secrets that pressed silently behind a single wooden door. The servants did not speak of it, but they felt it every time they walked through that corridor. The heavy knowledge that something important, something fragile, and something forbidden lived behind the door that never opened for them. The underground room was always dim, no matter the hour. Its walls were rough stone, cool to the touch, and the only light came from small clay lamps that Rufa lit each evening. The girls learned to live inside that soft, uneven glow. Light shaped their days, and shadows shaped their thoughts. Everything they did happened under the same warm flicker, as if the lamps were watching over them. The girls did not have a normal childhood. Their world was narrow, just a few connected rooms beneath the villa, with straw beds, thin blankets, and a low table for simple tasks. Above them, the household moved according to Roman customs and politics. Below, the girls lived according to a schedule created by the senator who controlled their futures. Rufa had been given the responsibility of preparing them. She taught them skills expected from Roman noble wives, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. Her life had been shaped by orders, and she passed on those orders in the calmest way she could. She understood that the lessons were not for the girls' benefit, but for the plans being made above them. The teaching began after the evening meal. Rufa would gather wool, spindles, and scraps of parchment, placing them neatly on the floor. The girls sat in front of her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and quiet curiosity. They did not fully understand why they needed these lessons, but they sensed their importance. Everything in the villa seemed to depend on preparation. The first skill Rufa focused on was spinning wool. It was considered a sign of discipline in Roman women. A woman who could spin fine, even thread, was seen as patient and steady qualities valued in marriages arranged for status. Rufa showed the girls how to pull the fibers gently, twist them with their fingers, and guide the spindle so the thread did not break. Claudia picked up the skill quickly. Her hands moved with careful control, and she learned to keep a steady pace. Marcia tried hard, watching every motion, adjusting her grip until her thread began to look smooth. Livia struggled the most. She was younger, and her hands trembled easily. The thread broke again and again, but Rufa helped without scolding. She understood that failure meant nothing here. The girls had no power except effort. Next came reading. Rufa used a small scrap of parchment, worn and faded, but still good enough to show simple words. She traced each letter slowly, letting the girls follow. Roman noble families preferred brides, who could read basic household notes lists, greetings, instructions, but not women who read too much. Reading too much meant thinking too much, and thinking too much meant questioning. These lessons stayed strictly practical. Claudia understood letters quickly. She learned by observation, recognizing patterns in the strokes. Marcia could read slowly after some time, sounding out each shape in her thoughts. Livia memorized letters by watching her older companions. She whispered them silently in her mind, hoping not to forget. Their final lessons were focused on posture and calm behavior. Rufa instructed them to sit straight, keep their hands folded neatly, and rise from the floor without stumbling. Roman households judged girls harshly on appearance. Even small movements could influence a future marriage agreement. Rufa knew this well. She carried the weight of experience in her bones. While she trained them, Rufa also watched the villa above through sound. Footsteps told her who walked near the stairwell. Slow, heavy steps meant Hilarius. Faster, sharper steps meant the senator. When the senator passed above, Rufa always stiffened. The air in the room changed. The girls did not need to be told. They felt it too. Sometimes the sounds above interrupted their lessons. A dropped vase, a distant argument, a visitor arriving late. Each noise echoed through the stone walls and reminded the girls that a whole world existed above them, one they were being shaped for but not included in. In the quiet moments between lessons, the girls examined the small pieces of their world. Marcia would run her fingers along the chipped edge of the table. Claudia would test her balance by standing with her back straight. Livia often watched the lamp flame as if trying to understand something hidden inside it. They learned not to ask questions. Questions had no place in rooms meant for waiting. Rufa tried to soften their days with small acts. She adjusted their blankets so they would not grow cold. She combed their hair gently when she had a moment. She made sure their water jug was never empty. These were not large gestures, but they were the only comforts she could offer. She could not open the door for them or change the plans made above. She could only guide them through the tasks they were given. As weeks passed, the girls grew familiar with the rhythm of their lessons. The lamplight became their teacher as much as Rufa. They marked time by the way the flame brightened and dimmed. They memorized the way shadows stretched across the floor when evening came. Their hands grew steadier. Their posture improved. Their eyes reflected a deeper understanding of their place in the villa. Above them, the household carried on with its political goals and alliances. Below them, the girls continued practicing skills meant to shape them into commodities. They learned to remain quiet, controlled, and predictable. In the underground room, beneath the soft flicker of lamps, the lessons prepared them not for freedom, but for futures arranged without their voices. Visitors arrived at the villa often, though not all visits carried the same purpose. Some came for friendly meals, others for political discussions, and some came simply to be seen. Roman nobles believed that being present in the right homes at the right moments could shape alliances more effectively than any law. These visits affected everyone in the villa, but they affected the girls below the strongest, even if the visitors never saw them. Whenever guests came, the villa changed its rhythm. Slaves moved with more urgency, polishing bronze plates, sweeping the floors again and again, and adjusting the cushions in the dining room. Hilarius inspected every corner to make sure nothing looked out of place. The villa needed to appear calm, wealthy, respectable, everything the outside world expected from a senator's household. The place beneath the floor had to stay invisible. One late afternoon, a group of important visitors arrived. Their clothing was bright, their sandals clean, and their arrival was announced by a small cloud of dust rising from their carriage wheels. Men like these did not travel quietly. Their footsteps carried authority. Their voices filled the atrium. They brought the energy of Rome's political world with them, as if the city itself had stepped inside the villa. Their presence sent a ripple through the household. Servants straightened themselves when walking through rooms. Rufa kept away from the main corridors, knowing she needed to appear as ordinary as possible. Cornelia observed the guests from a distance, measuring their attitudes and trying to read their intentions. She had seen enough visitors to understand when a meeting was more than a meal. Beneath the villa, the girls could not see the visitors, but they felt them. Sound traveled strangely through stone walls. The voices above grew louder, heavier, more pointed. The steps were firmer, echoing through the beams. They knew it was not an ordinary day. The room felt tighter. Even the lamps seemed to flicker more sharply. Clodia moved toward the center of the room, listening to the floor above. She had become skilled at identifying the rhythm of footsteps. The patterns today were unfamiliar. Marcia glanced toward the door, sensing tension from Rufa's hurried movements earlier. Livia held her blanket close, trying to steady herself. They knew the household felt different, even without being told why. The visitors drank wine in the upper rooms, speaking about military victories, land disputes, and future elections. This was the world they occupied, a world of influence, wealth, and expectation. And yet, without knowing it, they were part of the hidden structure that shaped the girls' lives below. Each conversation, each agreement, each nod between them could change the path of someone who had never been allowed to speak. The men eventually requested a tour of the property. This was common among nobles. They admired their friends' estates to compare them with their own, to judge wealth, to notice improvements they might copy. They moved down hallways, pointing at decorations, examining carvings, praising the mosaic work. They admired everything on the surface. The closer they came to the storage wings, the more careful the servants became. The passage near the whispering door was always the most dangerous during visits. Hilarius guided the men with practiced confidence, directing their attention to details that seemed impressive but meaningless. A beautiful pottery jar, a fine lamp, a newly repaired wall. Anything to keep them away from the hidden stair. Sometimes visitors paused, curious about the closed-off areas. The villa was large, and wealthy men often wanted to see every corner. This curiosity created moments of silent panic for the servants. A few steps in the wrong direction could reveal what had been hidden for years, but each time Hilarius redirected them smoothly, shifting their interest to safer ground. Above the underground chambers, the vibrations from their steps grew stronger. The girls sat still, listening as the footsteps moved closer, then farther, then closer again. Their world depended on the accuracy of Hilarius's guidance. They did not know who risked their futures for politics, but they felt the result with every echoing step. In the atrium, Cornelia watched the tour pass by. She noticed how the men carried themselves confident, casual, unaware of the strain their presence caused in the lower halls. She understood noble houses well enough to know that curiosity could be dangerous. Even a single request to see the storerooms could change the course of the day. When the visitors finally returned to the dining room, the villa released a slow, invisible breath. Plates were filled, wine cups moved from hand to hand, and the tension eased slightly. The danger had passed for the moment, but the atmosphere in the villa remained tight, like stretched fabric that had not fully relaxed. After the guests left late in the evening, the household returned to its usual pace. Servants cleaned the floors and carried away leftover food. Hilarius checked the corridor a final time. Cornelia retreated to her room, feeling the weight of the day settle in her chest. Below, the girls waited in silence. Once the house quieted, Rufa finally returned with their evening meal. Her expression carried relief, but also exhaustion. The girls did not need her to explain. They had felt every part of the day through the walls. Visitors might never know what existed beneath the villa, but their presence shaped the tension, the fear, and the preparation that structured the girls' lives. Every visit was a reminder that forces far above them controlled their future, even when those forces never saw their faces. The villa settled back into darkness. The lamps dimmed. The whispering door held steady, and the girls continued waiting for a world that moved around them, but never included them. Rome's Forum was the center of everything trade, law, politics, gossip. Each day, it filled with the sounds of merchants calling out prices, officials announcing court decisions, and crowds arguing about the newest rumors. Beneath all that noise moved another kind of activity, quieter, but far more powerful: the arrangement of marriages among the noble class. These agreements were not made out of affection, but out of strategy. They shaped alliances, secured favors, and strengthened a family's influence. Senator Lentulus Sura understood this better than most. His entire household operated around the idea that marriages could build power. For nobles, marriage was not personal, it was currency. And the girls hidden beneath his villa were his most valuable future bargaining pieces. Their lives were tied to promises he might trade for political support, votes, or protection. They existed in his ledger long before they would ever appear in a husband's home. On a busy afternoon, the forum was crowded with men wearing white togas and women carrying baskets of fruit. In the middle of this movement, senators discussed possible alliances the same way merchants compared grain prices. They spoke casually, but their decisions shaped lives across the city. When one noble hinted at needing a bride for a son or nephew, another noble listened closely, remembering which families had daughters soon to be of age. Lentulus Sura walked through the forum with practiced purpose. His eyes scanned the crowd not for goods, but for influence. Every handshake mattered. Every greeting carried meaning. A simple nod from the right man could shift how others treated him. Politics in Rome relied less on written agreements and more on presence and appearance. Nearby, two senators discussed suitable young women for upcoming marriage negotiations. They mentioned families with daughters raised for political unions, families known for strong reputations, and households known for strict control. The talk was casual, yet every word had weight. Somewhere beneath these discussions, invisible to those speaking, the names of the girls below Sura's villa were already in circulation, referred to only as potential matches, never as individuals. Even without being present, the girls existed in Rome's political market. They were figures in conversations men treated like business. Their value rose or fell depending on their age, reputation, and the strength of Sura's alliances. No one asked what they wanted. No one asked whether they understood the life awaiting them. Their futures were assigned before they even left the villa. As Sura moved through the forum, he heard his name mentioned in a group of gathered officials. The tone was calm, polite, but filled with curiosity. Interest in a senator's family was rarely innocent. It usually meant opportunities or risks. He joined the group with a smile, presenting himself as a man prepared for ambitious agreements. The senators welcomed him, already aware he might have something to offer. Conversations shifted to possible marriages. Men spoke of daughters as carefully as they spoke of wealth. Their questions circled around purity, discipline, and upbringing qualities said to guarantee a stable marriage alliance. The very traits Rufa taught the girls below the villa were being discussed as valuable assets above ground. The lessons, the posture, the quiet behavior, all of it was shaping the girls for these future conversations. Sura offered hints, never full details. He spoke of future prospects in his household, of carefully raised maidens, of strong family preparation. He let the listeners imagine whatever they preferred. The vague language allowed him to maintain control. The girls remained unseen but not unmentioned. They were useful precisely because they were hidden. Meanwhile, in the underground rooms, the girls continued their daily patterns unaware that their futures were being traded in the forum. They practiced reading simple letters, straightened their clothes, and learned skills that would make them desirable in elite households. They prepared for husbands chosen by men they would never meet until the final decision had already been made. Claudia often sensed when the villa above was connected to important conversations. The footsteps grew heavier when Sura returned from the forum. The air changed when he walked through the corridors with the confidence of someone who had secured new promises. Marcia sometimes felt the tension through Rufa, who always rushed more on days when the senator appeared energized by political discussions. Livia stayed close to the others, sensing shifts she couldn't explain, but still understood emotionally. The forum shaped the villa's mood. Every conversation held there affected the lives beneath the floor. Every nod exchanged by Sura influenced how Rufa prepared the girls. Even the simple act of a senator mentioning the word marriage could shift the atmosphere in the lower rooms. Back in the city center, as the sun dipped behind the Capitoline Hill, the forum slowly emptied. Merchants packed up their goods. Senators finished their conversations. But the decisions made that day lingered. They traveled back to the noble homes, shaping how families positioned themselves for the weeks ahead. When Sura returned to the villa, his steps echoed with satisfaction. The servants recognized it immediately. They had seen this mood before. It meant the girls would soon be prepared more strictly. It meant Rufa would carry new instructions. It meant another agreement had been formed on their behalf, out of sight, out of hearing, and without their permission. In the underground room, the lamps burned softly as the girls settled into another evening of lessons. Their world was small, but its shadows were shaped by the larger world above them, a world that treated marriages as transactions and futures as items to exchange. The market of matches always flowed through the forum, but its effects settled deepest beneath the villa, where three girls waited inside a life designed by decisions they never saw. The villa always followed a pattern when guests arrived. Lamps were lit earlier, bread was placed on the table in neat rows, and the servants' movements grew faster but quieter. This rhythm kept the household running smoothly, hiding any weakness from outside eyes. But on one particular night, that rhythm shifted. The arrival of a certain visitor changed the atmosphere in a way everyone sensed, even those deep beneath the house. The visitor was a senator of considerable rank, known for his curiosity and his sharp attention to detail. Men like him did not simply enjoy meals, they examined homes the same way they examined political rivals. Every object, every hallway, every decorative choice became part of their silent judgment. For the villa, this meant pressure. For those beneath the villa, it meant danger. The evening began like any other formal dinner. The atrium glowed with lamplight, and the air smelled of seasoned meat and sweet wine. Slaves carried platters with careful hands, trying to avoid any noise that might disrupt the gathering. Hilaris moved among them with calm authority, making sure every detail matched the expectations of the guest. But the guest was not easy to satisfy. He examined the painted walls with interest, noticing even the tiniest imperfections. He studied the arrangement of lamps, the pattern of the mosaic floor, and the quality of the wine served. He asked questions with his eyes rather than his voice. His silence carried pressure heavier than speech. Cornelia watched him from a distance. She understood how men like this operated. They searched for more than beauty, they searched for weakness. Their attention traveled to unexpected places, settling on doors, corridors, and shadows that most guests ignored. Cornelia felt a quiet fear settle over her. She knew the villa held things that could not withstand close inspection. Underneath the villa, the girls sensed the change in the air. The stone walls vibrated with the sound of footsteps, chairs, and shifting fabrics. The noise from above held a different tone, a sharper, heavier rhythm that suggested someone unfamiliar was walking across the floors. The girls could never see the visitor, but they felt the weight of his presence through the timber beams and the murmurs that slipped through cracks in the ceiling. Clodia sat still, listening carefully. Over time, she had learned how the villa's sounds revealed information. Tonight, the sound carried tension. Marcia folded her hands tightly in her lap, unsure what the noises meant but knowing they were not normal. Livia clung to Rufa's tunic as the older woman tried to maintain calm. Above them, the visitor requested to see more of the villa. The servants guided him through the triclinium, the storerooms, and the inner courtyard. He walked slowly, studying each space with a careful eye. His interest was not casual, it was deliberate, observant, and troubling. Hilaris followed closely, using subtle gestures to control the path they took. He had memorized every safe route, every hallway that would keep the guest away from the hidden stair. The visitor paused near the lower corridor. His eyes traced the shadows where the floor dipped slightly toward the storage passage. He stepped closer, drawn by curiosity or instinct. The servants stiffened. Hilaris positioned himself a step ahead, guiding the guest's attention toward a large piece of pottery recently placed in the hallway. He spoke with calm movements, using gestures to redirect the man toward a different part of the house. The guest hesitated, studying the dark end of the corridor for a moment longer. Then he turned away, following Hilaris toward the more decorated rooms. The danger passed, but only just. The villa's heart slowed, but it did not fully relax. Back in the underground room, the girls felt the momentary shock even without knowing what caused it. The footsteps above had slowed near their space, then pulled away. They did not know how close their lives came to being discovered that night. To them, the shift was only a strange change in sound-sharp tension, followed by an abrupt release. The dinner continued upstairs. Wine flowed, voices rose and fell, and the villa maintained its outward image of comfort and order. But underneath the polite conversations, the household remained tense. Servants whispered to one another in the kitchens. Cornelia walked with careful steps, trying to read the expression on the visitor's face. Hilaris monitored every movement, trying to prevent curiosity from slipping into danger. By the time the guest finally left, the villa felt drained. The lamps seemed dimmer, and the air felt lighter, as if something heavy had finally been lifted. The servants returned to their usual tasks with quiet relief. Hilaris inspected the lower corridor himself, checking to ensure nothing had been disturbed. Cornelia retreated to her room, feeling the weight of a night that revealed how fragile the villa's secrecy really was. Below the villa, Rufa returned to the girls with their nightly meal. Her face carried relief mixed with exhaustion. She placed the food down slowly, understanding that tonight had been different, even if the girls did not fully grasp why. The room felt safe again, but only temporarily. The danger had not disappeared. It had simply moved back into the shadows. As night settled over the villa, everything returned to stillness. But the memory of the visitor lingered in every corner, reminding the household that secrets could be threatened not only by scandal or rumor, but by a single curious step in the wrong direction. The wooden beams creaked as the house settled, and the whispering door remained closed. Yet everyone who lived above it carried a new awareness. Some dangers did not announce themselves. They arrived quietly, looked closely, and left silently, but left behind a deeper fear. Cornelia, the wife of Lentulus Sura, moved through the villa with steady, measured steps. She understood the household better than anyone realized. From the outside, she appeared like any Roman matron, calm, disciplined, maintaining her tasks with quiet dignity. But inside, she carried the weight of understanding that not all parts of her home were meant to be seen. Cornelia had not been told what existed beneath the villa. Nobles rarely explained such matters to their wives. They expected discipline, not knowledge. Still, Cornelia learned through small details, as all observant women in Roman households did. The truth revealed itself slowly, through patterns, the extra deliveries that never appeared in the storerooms, the linen that disappeared without explanation, the guarded expressions on the servants' faces, the tension that rose whenever visitors approached certain corridors. Knowledge crept into her mind without invitation. Her days followed a predictable rhythm. She supervised the weaving, checked the household accounts, and oversaw meals. She listened to servants' footsteps, measured the volume of conversations, and paid attention to what was not said. Each task added another piece to a puzzle she never asked to solve. She often walked through the peristyle garden in the morning. There, she trimmed the roses and studied the sky reflected in the pool. In the silence of the courtyard, she pieced together everything she had noticed from the day before. Cornelia never spoke her thoughts aloud, but she understood the villa well enough to sense its movements. She sensed structure, secrets, and pressure. The pressure came from her husband's ambitions. Lentulus Sura pushed constantly for a stronger position in the Senate. His goals reached beyond the villa, touching alliances, favors, and family connections. Cornelia did not interfere with these ambitions, but she recognized the cost required to maintain them. She saw how her husband grew tense whenever certain guests visited. She saw how he avoided glancing toward the lower hallway. She saw how the staff reacted when he walked past the stair leading down into the hidden rooms. Cornelia's world had been shaped by noble customs long before she arrived in this villa. As a young woman, she had learned that a Roman wife served as a support for her husband's political image. She managed the household and upheld appearances so he could focus on public matters. But no lesson had prepared her for the strange quiet surrounding the lower corridor. She began noticing the signs more clearly after Rufa returned from the market one morning with shaken hands. Rufa rarely showed emotion. Her work demanded strength. Seeing her uneasy made Cornelia more alert. She began watching the servants more closely. Their movements in the hallway near the hidden stair grew sharper, more careful. Their glances grew heavier, as if something unseen weighed on them. Cornelia did not need anyone to tell her that the lower rooms held more than simple stores. The villa had the feel of a house holding its breath. She sensed the presence of life beneath the floors, not because she heard voices, but because she sensed the rhythm of the household shift around that point. Her suspicions grew when she inspected the linen supply. She kept careful counts, and the numbers never matched what she expected. Extra cloths were missing always good linen, always cleaned more often than normal. She followed this trail, quietly marking which pieces disappeared and when. Every missing item pointed back to the same place. Cornelia understood that her husband's ambitions required more than political speeches. They required arrangements hidden from public view. The villa's secrets were tied to futures planned by men, not the lives of those affected by them. This realization settled inside her like a cold stone. On certain afternoons, Cornelia walked near the lower corridor. She never stepped into the forbidden section, but she paused near the wall, pretending to inspect a tapestry. There she listened for the faint movements beneath her feet. The villa was old, and sounds traveled strangely through the stone. Sometimes she heard a soft shift, like fabric being moved, or someone gently adjusting their seat. These sounds confirmed what she already knew. There were people below, and the villa moved around their existence without acknowledging them. Cornelia did not confront her husband. She understood that confrontation held no power in her position. Roman wives did not question decisions that concerned political gain. But she watched her husband more closely. She noted the satisfaction on his face after conversations in the forum. She observed how he returned from meetings more energized on days when marriage alliances were discussed. She knew how those alliances connected to the hidden lives beneath the floor. Rufa sensed that Cornelia understood more than she spoke. When the two crossed paths in the hall, there was often a moment of shared silence, brief, heavy, filled with unspoken recognition. Cornelia saw the exhaustion in Rufa's movements. Rufa saw the sadness in Cornelia's eyes. Neither woman had the power to alter the plans taking shape above and below, but both lived with the knowledge that the villa held girls whose futures were being shaped in secret. As days passed, Cornelia's awareness deepened. She noticed how the guards shifted positions near the lower entrance whenever important guests visited. She saw how Hilaris avoided the corridor unless absolutely necessary. She felt the tension inside the villa tighten like rope pulled too hard. Cornelia carried this knowledge silently, holding it in the same place she held her own regrets and disappointments. It settled inside her as another responsibility, one she had never asked to bear. Above, the villa continued its daily life as a noble home. Below, the hidden rooms filled with quiet lessons, whispered movements, and waiting. Cornelia felt both worlds at once. She knew too much to ignore the truth, and too little to change it. Her life became a balance of silence and awareness, shaped not by her choices but by the secrets buried under her own roof. Hilarius had served in the villa long enough for its secrets to settle into his bones. Most stewards in Roman households carried the weight of responsibility, but Hilarius carried something heavier, a quiet awareness that the peace of the villa depended on what stayed unseen. His job required discipline, memory, and obedience. Those qualities made him valuable to the senator. They also trapped him in duties he had never asked to bear. The hidden rooms beneath the villa shaped nearly every part of his daily work. He monitored the supplies that went down the stairwell, the linens that disappeared from the storerooms, and the schedules of the guards placed near the whispering door. He knew which days the senator returned tense from the forum, which mornings Cornelia walked past the lower corridor too slowly, and which evenings Rufa climbed the stairs with exhaustion in her steps. He recognized each sign and understood what it pointed to. Hilarius often walked the lower hall late at night, when most of the household slept. The corridor felt different in the quiet hours. Lamp flames flickered softly, casting long shadows against the stone. The walls seemed to hum with the sound of the house settling. He moved carefully, checking the hinges, the locks, and the torches. These actions were not part of any written rule. They were part of an unwritten oath he had formed with himself. This oath had grown slowly, shaped by years of watching the girls beneath the villa grow older. He was not allowed to speak to them except in short, functional moments, but he observed enough to feel responsible for their safety. He saw their daily lessons, their careful posture, their soft attempts to understand the life they had been placed into. He watched them move through a world that allowed them no choice. Each day, the weight of their situation pressed more deeply into him. The arrangement demanded secrecy, not affection. But Hilarius could not stop caring in the quiet way a man cares for someone he cannot help. That care never took the form of comfort. It took the form of diligence, checking doors, carrying supplies, and making sure threats remained outside. He remembered a moment years before, when a servant had accidentally wandered too close to the hidden stairwell. The servant had glimpsed something he should not have seen. Hilarius had been ordered to remove him. The memory stayed in his mind like a stain that would not wash away. He did not know what happened to the servant after that day, only that he never returned to the villa. The incident taught Hilarius the true meaning of silence, a meaning that shaped his oath. One evening, after the night of the unexpected wine, Hilarius walked the corridor again. The villa had been restless for days. Rumors from the city, growing questions among nobles, and the visit of a curious guest had thickened the air with unease. Hilarius felt the tension in every sound. He felt it in the quick steps of the servants, in the whispered movements below the floor, and in the way Cornelia carried herself with heavier stillness. He stopped in front of the whispering door. The wood was rough beneath his fingertips, worn by years of use. The door looked ordinary, yet behind it lived 3 young girls whose futures were tied to promises made far from their reach. Hilarius stood there longer than usual, listening to the quiet inside. He could hear soft movements, nothing alarming, just life continuing in a small hidden space. In that moment, the old oath inside him strengthened. It was simple in structure, but heavy in meaning. He would keep them safe from harm as much as he could. He could not change their fate, but he could protect them from the worst dangers that threatened to break into their world. He knew the villa rested on fragile foundations, and that the wrong visitor, the wrong question, or the wrong rumor could bring everything collapsing down upon them. His oath became a private commitment. It guided every decision he made. When the senator grew impatient or careless, Hilarius became more vigilant. When servants gossiped too freely, he quieted them with stern looks. When guards relaxed, he reminded them of their duties in ways that carried no anger but firm expectation. As the villa faced new threats, Hilarius's tasks grew more demanding. He noticed how often the senator spoke with visitors about alliances. He saw Cornelia watching her husband with a mixture of worry and distance. He recognized that the villa's stability was weakening one small crack at a time. The more unstable the upper world became, the more carefully he watched the lower. One night, he caught sight of Rufa returning from the hidden rooms with tired eyes and slow steps. She knew the villa's tension intimately. Her face showed years of effort, years of caring for the girls, without the ability to protect them from the plans surrounding their lives. Hilarious respected her strength. They shared an unspoken understanding. Neither could save the girls from their fate, but both could prevent their suffering whenever possible. As he continued to walk the corridor, the villa above began to quiet. The last lamps were extinguished, and the night settled like a calm blanket across the rooms. Hilarious made one final inspection before returning to his small sleeping quarters. He checked the door twice. He touched the lock once more. Then he stepped back, satisfied that the girls were safe for another night. The villa breathed around him, old, restless, and filled with tension. Hilarious carried the weight of its secrets as carefully as he carried the keys at his waist. His oath remained unspoken but steady, guiding him through every dark corridor and every risky day. Above, politics shaped futures. Below, 3 young lives waited, and between them stood Hilarious, a quiet guardian whose loyalty stretched beyond duty into something deeper, heavier, and entirely his own. Rumors in Rome spread faster than carts on a busy road. They slipped through market stalls, traveled across taverns, and grew louder in the public bathhouses where people relaxed and talked freely. In those steaming rooms, gossip became a kind of currency, traded, exaggerated, believed, or twisted into something new. It was in such a place, a crowded women's bathhouse in the Subura district, that the first whispers about Lentulus Sura's villa gathered strength. The bathhouse was filled with warm air and rising steam. Women lounged along the stone benches, soaking in heated pools after long days spent managing households, tending shops, or simply surviving the demands of the city. Bathhouses were designed for rest, but they also served as gathering places where information flowed easily. People shared news as naturally as they shared water. Among the women present that day were several who worked as laundresses, wet nurses, and household servants for noble families. These jobs gave them access to the private corners of Roman life. They handled clothing, overheard arguments, and witnessed details that nobles preferred kept quiet. Their knowledge, small and scattered, often formed the starting point of larger stories. One laundress mentioned a senator's home where linens vanished too quickly. Another described heavy guards stationed near storage rooms in a wealthy household. A third noted that a certain villa bought more olive oil and wool than a normal family could ever use. These details were small on their own, but when shared together, they created the outline of a secret. The women began piecing the information into something more solid. They did not know the full truth, but they sensed an unusual pattern. Too many guarded halls, too many hidden deliveries, too much fear in the servants' behavior. In Rome, such patterns rarely pointed to anything harmless. The women shared their observations with increasing interest, adding guesses and assumptions until the rumor gained shape. By the time the bathhouse emptied for the afternoon, the whispers had formed a clear conclusion. Lentulus Sura's villa hid young girls out of sight. No one in the bathhouse knew the names of the girls or the reason for their confinement. They knew only that something about the senator's household felt unnatural. And once suspicion took root, it grew quickly. The rumor passed from mouth to mouth as the women returned home. Some spoke of it along the crowded streets. Others mentioned it to neighbors. And still others carried it back to the households where they served. In Rome, information did not need proof to spread. It only needed interest. And this particular rumor stirred curiosity in almost everyone who heard it. By nightfall, the story had already traveled beyond the Subura district. Tavern keepers repeated it to customers. Market vendors whispered it between transactions. A few servants from other noble homes shared it quietly as they waited for water at the public fountains. Each retelling became more confident, as if the entire city already believed it. The rumor eventually reached the ears of the city's watchmen and low-ranking officials. They could not investigate based on gossip alone, but they listened carefully. Stories about senators usually led to opportunities for someone, opportunities for advancement, blackmail, or advantage. Whether the rumor was true did not matter. What mattered was who could use it. Meanwhile, life in the villa continued its delicate balance. Rufa returned from buying bread at the market with a stiffness in her posture. She sensed that people looked at her differently. She moved with more caution than usual, avoiding side paths where groups gathered to talk. The rumor touched her even before she knew its full shape. When she entered the villa, she carried with her the unsettling awareness that the outside world was beginning to look toward them. She performed her duties quietly, but her actions felt heavier. She knew the girls below had no understanding of the storm forming above them. In the underground room, the girls noticed small changes: Rufa's tense movements, the sharper tone of the guard's steps, the way Hilaris lingered near the corridor. They did not know why the household seemed tighter, only that something outside their world was shifting. They continued their lessons under lamplight, unaware that their existence had become the subject of public curiosity. That evening, Cornelia walked through the garden and sensed an unfamiliar pressure in the air. She did not know the rumor's exact content, but she felt its presence in the villa's altered mood. Rome's whispers had a way of reaching every household eventually, even those that tried hardest to remain hidden. In the atrium, Lentulus Sura received a short note from a fellow senator. The message made no direct accusation, yet its phrasing carried a hint of warning. Sura folded the note slowly. He felt the same chill that spread through his household but refused to acknowledge it openly. Rumors had left the bathhouse and entered the spaces of power. They had become something more than gossip. They had become a weakness. As night settled over the villa, the servants sensed a shift in the household's breath. The whispering door remained closed, but the world outside had begun to lean toward it. The villa could no longer rely on silence alone. The rumor spreading through Rome reached the Senate faster than Lentulus Sura expected. Senators were skilled at reading the city's mood, and many watched one another closely for signs of weakness. Even the smallest whisper could shift alliances. In a world where reputation mattered more than truth, rumors became tools, weapons, or traps. When Sura entered the Curia that morning, he felt the eyes of other senators turn toward him. The chamber was loud with debate, but underneath the noise rested a quiet tension directed his way. Some senators greeted him politely, but their greetings lacked warmth. Others avoided his gaze. A few too many seemed curious about him, studying his face, his posture, and the way he carried himself. Rome was a city that fed on scandal, and these men were hungry for new stories. Sura understood immediately that the rumor had reached them. He did not know exactly which version of the story traveled through the streets, but he knew what it suggested. In Rome, the idea of hidden girls was enough to cause suspicion. Senators might not care about the truth, but they cared about how a rumor could be used to weaken a rival. During the session, Sura felt his patience tighten. Discussions about grain shipments and tax reforms felt distant. His mind stayed in the villa, imagining the hidden rooms beneath his home and the unknown eyes watching for mistakes. The pressure in his chest grew heavier with every passing moment. After the Senate meeting ended, an older senator approached him. His expression was calm, almost friendly, but his presence carried meaning. Encounters like this were not casual. They were deliberate steps in political chess. Even without words, Sura knew what was being suggested. His household was being discussed, and men wanted answers. He left the Curia with a forced expression of calm. His steps toward the forum felt heavier than they had in years. The vendors shouting prices seemed louder than usual, the crowds thicker, and the city itself felt closer, as if trying to suffocate him with its noise. He returned to the villa with a sense of dread he tried to hide from the staff. Inside the atrium, Cornelia noticed the tension immediately. She watched her husband move through the house with a stiff posture, avoiding certain corridors and speaking sharply to any servant who stepped in his way. She recognized these signs. He was threatened, and when threatened, he tightened control over everything around him. Hilarus felt the shift too. Sura ordered him to inspect the storerooms, check every lock, and report any unusual behavior among the slaves. These instructions came with no explanation. They did not need one. Hilaris understood the meaning behind them. The villa needed to appear perfect. It needed to show no cracks. The servants sensed fear in the air even before they knew the cause. They worked faster, lowered their voices, and avoided unnecessary movements. Fear flowed silently from the upper rooms to the lower passages, settling in the corners like dust. Underneath the villa, the girls felt the atmosphere change. The footsteps from above grew sharper. The guards at the door became more alert. Rufa moved with caution, her eyes carrying a tired worry she tried to hide. The girls did not understand the details, but they recognized the signs. Something had gone wrong in the world above. Clodia noticed the guards staying longer outside the door. Marcia noticed the shorter amount of time Rufa spent with them. Livia noticed the way Hilaris's shadow paused outside the corridor before walking away. These small observations created a sense of unease that filled the room more deeply than the dim lamplight ever could. That evening, Sura called Hilaris to his study. The steward entered quietly, aware that any mistake now could cost him dearly. The senator spoke with firm gestures, ordering increased security around the lower section of the villa. He demanded absolute control over the passage leading to the underground rooms. Every movement was to be monitored. Every visitor was to be redirected. Every servant was to be watched. The tone of the household shifted. What had once been routine secrecy became something sharper, almost desperate. The villa tightened around its secret like a fist. Cornelia observed it all with quiet clarity. She watched Sura's growing fear shape the rooms around her. She understood that the girls beneath the villa were no longer simply hidden lives. They were now potential evidence in the eyes of Sura's rivals. Their existence could be used against him, and he knew it. In the underground room, the girls' world grew colder. Rufa continued teaching, but her movements became quicker and her instructions more focused. She kept her voice steady, but her eyes revealed the truth. The villa was preparing for something unpredictable. The walls seemed to listen to every sound. The lamps flickered, as if aware of the tension. The stone beneath the girls' feet felt harder than usual. Even the whispering door seemed heavier, absorbing the weight of the household's fear. Outside, in the streets of Rome, the rumor gathered strength. Servants carried it to new ears. Merchants repeated it at their stalls. Men in political circles discussed it quietly, testing how it might be used. The rumor no longer belonged to the bathhouse. It now lived in the city's bloodstream. Inside the villa, the senator paced in silence, imagining every possible threat. He believed he could contain the situation through control and careful planning. But control in Rome was fragile, and once a secret gained attention, it could be impossible to hide again. The villa stood still that night, its walls holding more tension than tranquility. Above, a senator worried about his career. Below, 3 young girls continued to quietly wait, unaware that their fate was being debated in rooms far above their reach. As the rumor spread through Rome, it eventually reached someone far from the city's political world, a farmer from the town of Praeneste. His name rarely appeared on any record, and his life was simple compared to noble families. But he carried a private grief that had not faded, the loss of his daughter, taken years earlier under unclear circumstances. He kept her memory alive through a small carved pendant she had worn around her neck since childhood. When he heard whispers that a senator might be hiding girls in his villa, the rumor hit him with unexpected force. The farmer traveled to Rome with the pendant wrapped in cloth. His walk lasted 2 days. When he reached the forum, he approached the small office where petitions were filed. Filing a petition was slow and formal, but it offered one thing the poor rarely received a chance to be heard. He placed his request before the clerk, a simple statement asking for information about a missing daughter and permission to investigate wealthy households. His words were brief, but they carried years of worry. The clerk recorded the request in a wax tablet. Normally, such petitions faded quickly, buried beneath political matters. But the growing rumor surrounding Lentulus Sura made this one different. It added weight to a story that could no longer be ignored. The small pendant, tied to the farmer's memory, now became part of a larger question. What exactly was hidden inside the senator's villa? Meanwhile, in another part of the city, 2 ambitious men learned of the petition. One was Marcus Flavius, a legal advocate known for noticing opportunities in the missteps of senators. The other was Lucius Sergius Catilina, a politician skilled at turning suspicion into leverage. They approached the matter not out of concern for the girls, but out of interest in weakening a rival. In Rome, one man's problem was another man's advantage. The petition gave the rumor new life. It became more than gossip, it became a possible case. The act of writing it placed pressure on the magistrates. A formal request demanded review, even if reluctantly. Magistrates could ignore street talk, but not tablets stored in their archives. The petition forced the city to acknowledge something might be hidden behind the carefully maintained walls of Sura's estate. Back at the villa, the household felt the change. Hilarus noticed that visitors spoke to him with forced politeness, as if measuring his reactions. Guards started to look more alert, shifting their weight near the lower hall. Rufa sensed the shift too, noticing how quickly tasks were being carried out, and how servants avoided eye contact more than usual. Tension flowed through the house like invisible smoke. Cornelia, walking through the peristyle garden, felt a subtle dread settle in her chest. She sensed that something outside the villa had begun moving toward them. The air felt heavier, and the villa's usual quiet held a sharper edge. She observed her husband more closely. His expression became tight and distant, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. He carried the unease of someone who knew threats were forming just beyond his reach. Underneath the villa, the girls continued their daily lessons without understanding the full situation. They practiced reading, spindle work, and posture, unaware that their existence was now part of a public document stored miles away. They felt the change only through the footsteps above the hurried steps of servants, the firmer steps of guards, and the slow, controlled steps of the senator. Everything in the house felt tighter. The petition reached the magistrates' attention by afternoon. They examined it with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a simple case of a worried father. Others saw it as a potential opportunity to investigate a powerful household. The city had a complicated relationship with its senators. Officials feared them, respected them, and watched them closely. When the slightest chance appeared to expose a hidden wrongdoing, some officials took interest. Marcus Flavius and Catilina added fuel to the matter by gathering a few testimonies from servants who had worked near the senator's home. These testimonies were vague but suggestive details about guarded hallways, mysterious deliveries, and strange instructions given to certain staff. On their own, these details proved little. Combined with the petition, they painted a picture worth examining. Sura became aware of the petition before the magistrates contacted him. News traveled quickly among nobles. He received warnings from 2 senators who believed he should manage the situation before it spread further. Their warnings were not compassionate, they were practical. A scandal in one noble household could stain others who were connected to it. The senator's anxiety grew. His household tightened its structure even more. Guards monitored the lower passage with strict discipline. Hilarus reviewed every part of the villa with sharper attention. Rufa avoided unnecessary movement, fearing any misstep might draw suspicion. The girls below sensed the rising tension like a shift in weather. They did not know that a small wooden pendant in a farmer's hand had pushed their world toward exposure. They only felt that the villa above had become heavier, the footsteps more anxious, and the air in their room colder. As the sun set, the magistrates reached a decision. They would visit the villa and inspect it. It would not be a full investigation, but it would be enough to pressure the senator, enough to break the surface of the secret. In Praeneste, the farmer returned home hopeful for the first time in years. His petition was small, but it had entered the machinery of Rome, a machinery strong enough to affect even the highest houses. Above the villa, the sky darkened. Below it, the whispering door waited, holding the lives at the center of a secret that could no longer stay hidden. The villa usually dimmed in the late evening. Servants extinguished most lamps. The last chores were finished, and the house settled into a quiet rhythm shaped by routine. But on this night, that rhythm changed. Torches remained burning along the corridors, their flames tall and restless. Their light revealed something the household rarely showed fear. Ever since word of the petition reached the magistrates, the villa behaved like a place waiting for a storm. Guards were placed in positions normally left unoccupied. Servants walked quickly, speaking in short phrases or not at all. The air felt too thick, as if holding its breath. Even the animals in the courtyard appeared unsettled, shifting restlessly near their feeding troughs. Hilaris sensed the tension as soon as he returned from a late inspection of the storerooms. The guards standing near the lower passage were stiffer than usual. Their shadows stretched across the floor like long black bars, as if dividing the house into sections that could not be crossed. Hilaris understood why the senator ordered such precautions. A single mistake could expose everything hidden beneath the villa. Inside the underground room, the girls noticed the change without knowing its cause. The little space felt tighter than usual. The lamplight seemed harsher, casting sharp edges across the walls. They heard the unusual amount of movement above the heavy steps of guards, the shifting of furniture, and the scrape of something large being dragged across the floor in the hallway. These sounds were strange, and the girls recognized them instantly. Claudia looked toward the wooden door whenever footsteps approached. Over time, she had learned to interpret the villa's noises. Loud, hurried footsteps often meant stress. Slow, steady footsteps meant control. Tonight, the footsteps above carried both qualities at once, hurried, but forced to seem calm. Marsa sat near the corner, her body small and tense. Livia stayed close to Rufa, seeking comfort in her steady presence. Rufa herself felt the pressure weighing heavily on her shoulders. She moved with greater caution, gathering supplies and delivering food with fewer pauses. She understood that anything that happened tonight could affect the girls' futures. The villa felt unstable, as if the walls were listening to every action. She remained watchful, paying attention to every shift of sound, every echo, and every change in the guards' patterns. Above, Cornelia observed the shifting atmosphere with quiet awareness. The additional torches revealed parts of the villa she rarely saw illuminated. Shadows clung to the corners, but the bright flames exposed more than light. They revealed the shape of fear inside the household. She walked past the atrium, noticing how the water in the central pool reflected the unstable torchlight. The rippling surface reminded her of the uncertain days ahead. Lentilisura moved quickly through the house, studying each torch, each locked door, and each guard. His movements were sharp, almost restless. He understood that the magistrate's visit would come soon, and he needed the villa to appear in complete order. It was a performance, one he had rehearsed in his mind but never expected to carry out so urgently. He knew that mistakes could become accusations, and accusations could become threats to his career. The girls hidden beneath the villa represented a fragile arrangement, one he believed he could control. But now, with the city whispering and officials preparing to approach his door, the arrangement felt less like control and more like a trap closing around him. Hilaris approached the lower corridor again, checking the door and securing the latch. He listened for sounds from inside. Only the soft shifting of straw reached his ears. He stood there a moment longer than necessary, breathing in slowly. Each night, responsibility seemed heavier than the night before. He was not afraid for himself. He was afraid of what would happen if the secret of the lower rooms unfolded in the hands of those who did not care for the girls' well-being. The guards nearby shifted their stance. Their armor clinked softly, creating echoes in the narrow hallway. These sounds reached the girls below, making them grow more still. The presence of multiple guards was unusual. Even they understood that. Rufa returned to the underground room with blankets tucked under her arm. She placed them gently on the girls' beds. These blankets were not meant for comfort. They were meant for protection from the cold stone, from uncertainty, and from the restless air filling the villa. Rufa stayed only a short moment, leaving again as soon as she sensed footsteps above the stair. Cornelia passed through the hall near the lower entrance later that night. She pretended to inspect the wall hangings, but she was really studying the guards' positions and the nervous energy surrounding the corridor. She understood the meaning behind these actions. The senator was preparing for the magistrate's arrival. The villa had become a place divided: upper rooms filled with political anxiety, lower rooms filled with quiet fear. The silence between these two worlds felt sharper than a blade. As the night deepened, the torches continued to burn. Their flames flickered against the stone walls, creating patterns that seemed to shift with each heartbeat. No one slept easily. Every sound carried too much meaning. Every breath inside the villa held tension. The girls lay awake beneath their blankets, listening to the restless world above. They did not know the details of the petition or the conversations in the forum. They did not understand the political forces shaping the walls around them, but they understood fear, and they understood change. They felt both in the weight of the air, the pace of footsteps, and the tightened rhythm of the villa. That night, the house did not rest. The torches stayed lit, guarding secrets that could no longer remain hidden forever. Across the ruins of history, Rome still stands as a symbol of order and greatness. Yet its strength was often built on hidden rooms, unspoken bargains, and lives shaped far from public view. The stories buried beneath noble villas reveal a different Rome, one driven not only by politics and glory, but by secrecy, fear, and the quiet cost paid by those with no voice. These forgotten chambers remind us that power has always depended on what can remain unseen, and on the people forced to live in the shadows of ambition. If this chapter of Rome's hidden world has left you curious, stay with us as we continue uncovering the stories that history tried to bury. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next deep dive into the ancient world. Your support helps bring these untold histories back into the light.